You are not tired. You are being slowly erased. This isn't burnout. This is what happens when your existence becomes a service people feel entitled to. You wake up drained before the day even starts. Because deep down, you already know how it will go. Someone will need something. Someone will lean on you. Someone will take. And you will give again. You are the dependable one. The one who never says no. At work, you carry responsibilities that were never in your job description. You fix mistakes you didn't make. You stay late while others leave early. You become essential, and that's exactly why you're never promoted. They don't reward pillars. They lean on them until they crack. You don't get ahead. You get exploited quietly. In relationships, it's even uglier. You are praised for being understanding, mature, easygoing. Translation: you don't push back, you don't demand. You don't make people uncomfortable. You forgive before you're even apologized to. You explain their behavior better than they ever could. And every time you do that, you teach them one thing. You will tolerate less than you deserve. What destroys you isn't the giving. It's the realization that no one is counting the cost. If you stop replying, stop helping, stop showing up. Most people won't ask if you're okay. They'll ask what happened to the support. That's when it hits. They don't miss you. They miss your function. This exhaustion doesn't show up as pain. It shows up as numbness, as bitterness you pretend isn't there, as the quiet shame of knowing you're living smaller than you are capable of, just to be accepted. Look around carefully. The most respected person in the room isn't the kindest. It's the one who can leave, the one who isn't afraid to be disliked, the one who doesn't beg to be chosen. Here is the truth that should scare you. You're not exhausted because you give too much. You're exhausted because you keep offering your life to people who never saw you as anything more than something to use. That exhaustion isn't a weakness. It's proof you've been playing by rules that reward obedience, not respect. And once you see who wrote those rules, everything you were taught about being good starts to collapse. This is where most people shut the door. Because the answer isn't comforting. It doesn't sound kind. And it definitely doesn't sound polite. This is where Niccolò Machiavelli enters the conversation. Machiavelli is often painted as a monster, but that's lazy thinking. He wasn't trying to make people cruel. He wasn't teaching manipulation for sport. He was doing something far more threatening. He was watching how power actually moves between human beings, not how we wish it would. He didn't study ideals. He studied outcomes. He asked why people who followed every moral rule still ended up used, discarded, and forgotten. And what he saw was brutal. Human beings don't reward goodness by default. They reward leverage. They respond to consequences. They respect strength long before they respect intention. That doesn't make people evil. It makes them human. This video is not here to teach you confidence affirmations. It's not here to tell you to love yourself harder or smile through disrespect. Those ideas feel good, but they don't change your position in the world. This video exists for one reason only: to explain why being good without understanding power quietly turns you into a resource for other people's lives. And once you see that pattern clearly, you stop blaming yourself for being tired. You realize the exhaustion wasn't random. It was the cost of playing a game you were never taught the real rules to. You think being useful makes you safe. That belief feels logical. It feels adult. It feels like survival. If I help enough, if I stay valuable, if I make myself indispensable, I won't be discarded. That idea has kept a lot of good people alive. It has also quietly destroyed their dignity. Here is the part no one wants to admit. usefulness without resistance does not signal value. It signals availability. And availability, in the language of instinct, is not respected. It is consumed. In the human mind, long before logic kicks in, there is a faster system running. It scans for effort, reaction, consequence. When someone realizes you will keep giving without pushing back, something flips. You stop being seen as a person with limits and start being processed as a resource. Not because they are evil, because the brain is efficient. It keeps pulling from places that never push back. Or look at the friend who always lends money. The first time it's appreciated. The second time, it's normal. By the third time, it's assumed. When they finally say no, the shock isn't about the money. It's about the loss of access. The relationship doesn't break because they changed. It breaks because their usefulness was the only glue holding it together. From an instinctive point of view, this makes sense. Predators don't hunt what fights back. They hunt what freezes, what absorbs, what doesn't react. In everyday life, this shows up as people interrupting you, canceling on you, underpaying you, overstepping you. Each time you let it slide, the brain on the other side learns something important. There is no cost here. This is where the illusion collapses. Being good does not equal being protected. Being helpful does not equal being valued. Without the ability to create consequence, kindness becomes invisible. And invisible things are stepped on without thought. Here is the line that changes how you see everything. Being useful doesn't make you safe. It makes you replaceable. Because the moment you can't give, can't help, can't carry the load, there is nothing left holding your position. Respect is not given to those who never react. It is given to those who have consequences. When that realization settles in, something becomes painfully clear. Giving more was never the solution. It was part of the problem. If constant availability is what made you easy to use, then your transformation must begin with the decision to pull back. This is where you move from being a resource to a sovereign, governed by 4 fundamental laws that will redefine your value and reclaim your power. 1. Scarcity. Why pulling back creates value. Scarcity feels uncomfortable to people who were taught that love, loyalty, and value come from giving more. When you've spent years proving yourself through effort, pulling back feels wrong, even dangerous. It feels like you're risking connection. But here's the truth that changes everything. Nothing that is always available is ever deeply valued. Not because people are cruel, but because the human mind adapts quickly to constant access. Think about it. When something is always there, the brain stops registering it as special. It becomes background noise. Effort fades into expectation. Presence turns into entitlement. That's not manipulation. That's psychology. And it applies to time, attention, energy, and even love. This is why giving more rarely fixes disrespect. It usually accelerates it. When you keep showing up without limits, people don't think, wow, this person cares. They think, I can always get them. And once that belief settles in, your value drops silently. Not because you changed, but because access became unlimited. Look at something simple. The phone. When you answer every call immediately, reply to every message instantly, and make yourself reachable at all hours, people stop appreciating your time. They interrupt freely. They assume availability. But when you don't pick up every time, when responses are intentional instead of automatic, something shifts. People start choosing their words. Calls become more thoughtful. Your time feels heavier. Not because you demanded respect, but because access became selective. Scarcity is not about playing games. It's not about disappearing to provoke anxiety. It's about redistributing your energy toward what actually matters. It's choosing when to engage instead of reacting on reflex. The difference is subtle, but powerful. Manipulation is designed to control others. Scarcity is designed to protect yourself. Think about someone who is always free versus someone who is genuinely busy building something meaningful. The first feels convenient. The second feels valuable. You don't need to announce your absence. You don't need dramatic exits. You simply stop overextending. You stop filling every silence. You stop rescuing every situation. And suddenly, your presence carries weight. This is why people with boundaries are treated differently. It's not that they're colder. It's that their availability has a cost. When you say yes to everything, your yes is cheap. When you say no often, your yes becomes an event, something chosen, something respected. Most people misunderstand this and think scarcity means withholding affection or becoming distant. That's not the point. The point is intention. You're no longer accessible by default. You're accessible by choice. And choice is where value begins. Look at your own life. How often do people reach out only when they need something? How often do conversations revolve around their problems, their urgency, their schedule? Scarcity breaks that pattern, not by confrontation, but by absence. When your energy isn't always on the table, people either step up or step away. Both outcomes are information. Here's the line that matters. People don't value effort. They value access. Effort can be exploited. Access must be earned. When you stop giving unlimited access to your time, attention, and emotional labor, you don't lose your value. You finally reveal it. And the people who were only there for what you provided will quietly fall away, leaving space for relationships that are based on respect instead of convenience. 2. Integrating the shadow, the sovereignty of limits. And once you stop absorbing disrespect with silence, you're forced to confront an even deeper habit that kept you trapped in the first place. The reflex to manage other people's emotions so you never have to face their discomfort. Most people think being good means being harmless, quiet, agreeable, easy to deal with. They confuse softness with safety and assume that if they never upset anyone, they'll never be attacked. That belief feels moral, but it's dangerous. Because harmless people don't inspire trust or respect, they inspire testing. Here's the distinction no one taught you. Aggression is not violence. Aggression is not yelling, threatening, or losing control. Aggression is the internal energy that says, "This is where I stop, and you don't cross." It's the force that protects your boundaries. Without it, your boundaries are imaginary. They exist only in your head, and everyone else senses that. Think about how often you felt that heat in your chest when someone disrespected you. A colleague talked over you. A partner dismissed something important. A friend pushed too far. You felt it instantly. Tight throat, faster heartbeat. That wasn't anger trying to ruin the moment. That was self-respect trying to defend you. And what did you do? You swallowed it. You smiled. You told yourself it wasn't worth it. You chose peace and paid for it later. Every time you do that, you train people how to treat you, not with words, but with outcomes. If nothing happens when someone crosses your line stops existing. They don't think, "I shouldn't do that again." They think, "I can do that again." That's not malice. That's learning. This is why boundaries without consequence don't work. Saying, "I don't like that," while continuing the relationship exactly as before, teaches nothing. Explaining your feelings while absorbing the behavior teaches nothing. Over-communicating is not strength when it's unsupported by action. A boundary without consequence is just a suggestion. Real boundaries are quiet. They don't beg. They don't lecture. They don't over-explain. Sometimes they look as simple as eye contact in one sentence. I won't accept that. Then silence. No justification, no apology, no follow-up. That silence is doing the work. It forces the other person to sit with the reality that something changed. This is where many people panic. They confuse aggression with cruelty. They think standing firm means becoming someone they're not. It doesn't. You're not becoming hostile. You're becoming clear. Clear about what costs access to you. Clear about what changes the relationship. Clear about the fact that your presence is not unconditional. Notice who is respected in any room. It's not the loudest person. It's not the nicest one either. It's the person who doesn't absorb disrespect. The one who can hold tension without collapsing. The one who doesn't rush to smooth things over. That calm firmness signals something primal. This person has teeth. Not because they want to bite, but because they can. People treat you carefully when they sense consequence. Not explosive consequence. Relational consequence. They know that if they cross certain lines, access changes, tone changes, distance appears. That awareness is what creates respect. Without it, kindness turns into permission. You don't need to dominate anyone. You don't need to intimidate. You don't need to perform toughness. You only need to stop abandoning yourself at the first sign of discomfort. The moment you stop sacrificing your boundaries to keep the peace, the dynamic shifts. Some people will adjust. Some will leave. Both outcomes are information. Here's the hard truth. The version of you that never pushes back was never keeping you safe. It was keeping others comfortable. And comfort is cheap. Respect is not. A boundary without consequence is just a suggestion. But a boundary backed by quiet, controlled aggression changes how people see you forever. Not because you became mean, but because you became someone who cannot be used without cost. 3. Emotional autonomy. Refusing the burden of others. Power doesn't break you first. Guilt does. And guilt survives because you were trained to carry emotions that were never yours. One of the most exhausting habits you've been living with isn't overworking or overgiving. It's emotional management. You've made it your job to keep everyone else comfortable, calm, and satisfied, even when it costs you your peace. You walk into a room already scanning for tension. You listen for tone shifts. You read between lines. And the moment someone seems annoyed, disappointed, or distant, you move to fix it. Not because you caused the problem, but because you've been trained to believe that discomfort is dangerous. This is where the real self-destruction begins. Fixing other people's moods feels like kindness, but it's actually a survival strategy. Somewhere along the way, you learned that harmony keeps you safe. That if everyone is okay, you're okay. So you apologize quickly. You soften your words. You backtrack your boundaries. You say yes when your body is screaming no, just to avoid the weight of someone else's displeasure. And every time you do that, you trade a piece of your self-respect for temporary relief. The problem is, relief doesn't last. The more you regulate other people's emotions, the less they learn to regulate their own. You become the shock absorber for everyone's stress. At work, this looks like agreeing to unreasonable deadlines because your boss seems overwhelmed. In relationships, it looks like tolerating behavior that hurts you because you don't want to start a fight. You tell yourself you're being mature. In reality, you're teaching people that your limits don't matter. Say no once and watch what happens. The other person gets uncomfortable, maybe annoyed, maybe cold. That moment feels unbearable if you're addicted to approval. Your instinct will be to explain yourself, to justify, to soften the no into a yes-shaped apology. But that discomfort isn't an emergency. It's not a problem you need to solve. It's simply someone else experiencing a boundary for the first time. Take someone like Emily. Early 30s, smart, empathetic. Everyone described her as easy to work with. When her co-workers were stressed, she absorbed it. When friends were upset, she rushed to smooth things over. One day she said no to covering a shift she couldn't handle. The reaction was sharp. Passive comments, distance. Emily almost caved. But she didn't. She sat with the discomfort. A week later, something changed. People stopped assuming she'd always bend. Not because she argued, but because she didn't rescue them from their feelings. Here's what most people don't realize. Other people's emotions are not a measure of your morality. Someone being upset doesn't mean you did something wrong. Someone being disappointed doesn't mean you owe them anything. Discomfort is part of adulthood. When you constantly remove it for others, you position yourself below them. You become the emotional servant, not the equal. Emotional autonomy is the ability to let someone feel what they feel without rushing in to fix it. It's staying grounded when someone disapproves of you. It's understanding that your nervous system doesn't need to mirror theirs. This is not coldness, it's strength. When you stop managing other people's reactions, you regain control over your own life. Notice how manipulators operate. They don't argue facts. They apply pressure through guilt, silence, disappointment. Those tactics only work if you believe their feelings are your responsibility. The moment you stop reacting, the leverage disappears. No explanation, no defense. Just calm refusal. This is the shift that frees you. You stop asking, how do I keep them happy? And start asking, can I live with their discomfort? And when the answer becomes yes, everything changes. You don't lose your empathy, you refine it. You learn the difference between compassion and self-erasure. Here is the line you need to remember when the guilt rises. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. It never was. And the day you stop carrying emotions that aren't yours is the day your energy comes back to you, steady, grounded, and finally your own. 4. Stop maintaining. Start building. When you stop managing other people's emotions, something unexpected happens. You don't just gain peace. You gain time, energy, and mental space. And that space demands to be filled with something new, something that moves your life forward instead of keeping it stuck in survival mode. This is where the real shift begins. You stop living as a helper and start living as a builder. Helpers exist to maintain other people's worlds. Builders create their own. A helper wakes up asking, who needs me today? A builder wakes up asking, what am I building today? That single question changes everything. When you have a direction, your time stops being free. When you have a goal, your energy stops being public property. Scarcity stops being a tactic and becomes a byproduct of purpose. Look at the difference in daily behavior. A helper skips the gym to solve someone else's crisis. A builder trains even when no one is watching, because their body is part of the structure they're building. A helper takes on extra work to be liked. A builder develops skills that increase leverage, not approval. A helper waits to be needed. A builder becomes hard to replace. This is why builders are respected without asking for it. Their lives have momentum. Their attention is already committed. When someone tries to pull them into unnecessary drama, the answer isn't emotional. It's logistical. I don't have time for that. not as an excuse, as a fact. And facts don't argue. Think about someone who finally decided to focus on themselves after years of overgiving. They stopped explaining every choice. They trained their body 3 mornings a week. They spent nights learning a skill instead of answering messages that led nowhere. At first, people were confused. Some felt rejected. A few drifted away. But something else happened quietly. The conversations that remained became more respectful. Invitations became intentional. Time spent together became deliberate. Not because they demanded it, but because their life was no longer empty enough to be filled by anyone. Building doesn't mean isolating yourself. It means orienting your life around growth instead of obligation. When your days are filled with training, learning, creating, and progressing, you naturally become less available. You don't have to withdraw. You're already occupied. And that occupation changes how people treat you. This is the offensive move most people never make. They spend their lives defending boundaries instead of building something worth protecting. But once you have a mission, boundaries enforce themselves. You don't argue. You don't negotiate. You move forward. Here is the line that marks the shift. Helpers get drained. Builders get respected. Because helpers exist to be consumed. But builders create gravity. And gravity doesn't chase. It pulls. At some point, this journey demands a final decision. Not about strategy. Not about boundaries. But about identity. You have to decide who you are willing to disappoint so you don't keep abandoning yourself. Because the truth is brutal and simple. The moment you stop overgiving, people will notice. And not everyone will like it. They will call you selfish. Not because you are, but because you stopped subsidizing their comfort. They will say, "You've changed," as if that's an accusation. What they really mean is, "You no longer behave in ways that benefit me without cost." And that realization makes people uncomfortable. Let it. This is where most people break, not because they don't know what to do, but because they can't tolerate being misunderstood. They rush to explain. They soften their edges. They go back to being agreeable so the tension disappears. But every time you do that, you pay with something far more expensive than disapproval. You pay with self-respect. Here's the part no one warns you about. Choosing yourself will cost you relationships, not healthy ones, convenient ones. The ones built on access, compliance, and emotional labor. When you stop offering yourself as a service, some people won't renegotiate. They'll leave. That's not loss. That's clarity. Look at the people who live with quiet confidence. They aren't liked by everyone. They aren't constantly explaining themselves. They move calmly, speak directly, and accept friction without panic. They understand something most people never do. Being respected requires the courage to be disliked. This is your final shift. You stop chasing approval and start choosing alignment. You stop asking, "How do I make this easier for them?" and start asking, "Can I live with betraying myself again?" When the answer becomes no, everything changes. So here's the line to remember when guilt shows up wearing a moral mask. The price of being liked by everyone is being invisible to yourself. Pay the other price. Stand in your choices. Let the noise pass, and walk forward knowing that peace built on self-respect lasts far longer than comfort built on self-erasure. At the end of all this, there's nothing left to figure out. No new technique, no hidden rule, just a choice you can't avoid anymore. You can keep being liked and slowly disappear, or you can accept friction and finally feel solid in your own life. Because every time you say yes when you mean no, Every time you explain yourself to be accepted, every time you shrink to keep the peace, you're teaching the world that you're negotiable. People will call you selfish. Let them. People will say you've changed. They're right. You stopped bleeding quietly. The truth is simple and unforgiving. The price of being liked by everyone is being invisible to yourself. And that's a price you've already paid for too long. If this video made you uncomfortable, don't rush to escape that feeling. Discomfort is what clarity feels like before it settles. Most people numb it and go back to old patterns. If you're still here, it means something in you is done living on autopilot. This channel isn't here to motivate you. It's here to strip away illusions that keep you easy to use. Understanding is only the first step. What matters is what you do next. Pull your energy back. Set limits. Build something that doesn't require approval to survive. So here's the decision. Watch and forget, or stay and apply. If you're ready to stop paying for peace with self-betrayal, subscribe and stay close. Not for comfort, for clarity.